Today we are jumping into a full century of turmoil and transformation in one city, Paris, from 1789 to 1889. We're not just revisiting the French Revolution. We're looking at how the city itself, its streets, its buildings, its people, was the actual engine of change.
That's it exactly. Our whole mission here is to trace this incredible arc. We're going from what was called the Royal City, a place where real power was still with the nobility, out in the countryside at Versailles, all the way to bourgeois Babylon.
Bourgeois Babylon. I like that.
It's a city defined by industry, by capital, and it's all symbolized, really, by the Eiffel Tower rising up at the end of that century.
And it's a story of conflict. So we have three big questions to tackle. First, who were the demos? Who were these common people who actually lit the fuse? Second, we have to unpack the two revolutions that were basically at war with each other. The moderate 1789 version versus the radical 1793 version. And finally, the big paradox. How did the common people, who were the muscle, end up losing control of the very city they fought for?
And to really get that, you have to start with the basics, with what democracy even meant back then. When our sources talk about the demos, they're not just saying the people in a general sense.
It's more specific.
Much more specific. It means the common people, the masses, the 99%, they were always defined in opposition to the aristoi, the elite, the wealthy few.
And that's a pretty revolutionary idea in itself for the 18th century.
It's the whole ballgame, because democratic progress, as the sources frame it, is always bottom-up. It happens when huge numbers of people, the demos, use their collective power through strikes, protests, or, revolution. And a revolution here is a movement for the lower class at the expense of the upper class. That's the tension.
Okay, so let's paint a picture of this royal city before it all blows up. Paris is technically the capital, but it's ruled from Versailles, out in the country.
Which tells you everything, right? Power lies with landowners, the nobility, the clergy. The whole economy is still fundamentally agricultural.
And Paris itself is this strange mix. The sources call it half urban, half rural. You've got these little pockets of countryside, rus in herb, right in the city.
Yeah, the place where the Eiffel Tower would eventually be built, that was the Grenelle Plain. It was basically farmland.
And you could tell who was who just by looking at them. The nobility were a leisure class. You'd see them in their expensive clothes and, most importantly, their tight breeches, the culottes.
And those clothes signaled something critical. You didn't work and you didn't pay taxes. Then you had the clergy, who owned a staggering amount of wealth. We're talking maybe 5 to 10% of all the land in France. And the top jobs, the archbishops, they were all recruited from the nobility. They lived these lavish lifestyle, often ignoring things like, celibacy, which just fueled the anger on the street.
And that anger was concentrated in one place more than any other.
Yeah.
The eastern suburb, the Faubourg Saint-Antoine.
The absolute powder keg. This was popular Paris. Mm-hmm. The people there, the Faubourians, were artisans, manual laborers, not factory workers yet, but these are the people who will become the famous sans-culotte.
Literally, without the breeches.
Without the fancy knickers of the rich, exactly. And their situation was just desperate. The population was growing, but farming was stagnant, so the price of bread, their main food, it just went through the roof.
I read one estimate that on the eve of the revolution, a worker was spending nearly 90% of his wages just on bread.
90%. I mean, you can't live. It's starvation. And that's why you get these rumors of an aristocratic conspiracy, the idea that the rich are hoarding grain to drive up prices. These are the hungry, angry people who become the shock troops of 1789.
So the spark is lit, but it comes from the middle class, right? The king calls the Estates General at Versailles, and the Third Estate just declares itself the National Assembly.
And that's the political start. But you can literally track the revolution's momentum by watching where power moves in Paris. These lieux de mémoire, these sites of memory.
It starts with the Bastille. July 14th, 1789, the common people storm it, and suddenly they're a real force in this political game.
And right away, the center of power moves to the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall. That becomes the home of the commune, the city government, the seat of popular power. It's where they force King Louis XVI to wear the revolutionary cockade.
Yeah.
A huge humiliation.
And then the final move, the Tuileries Palace. In October, the royal family is forced to leave Versailles and move right into the heart of Paris.
Which is symbolic, but also very real. The monarchy is now a prisoner of the city. The entire political center of gravity has shifted from the country to the city, from the nobility to the people.
And as soon as that happens, this ideological crack just bursts wide open.
Yes, because the French Revolution was never just one thing. It was at least two different and often totally opposed movements running at the same time.
Okay, so let's break that down.
First, you've got the 1789 revolution. That's the moderate liberal bourgeois revolution. Their goals are about abolishing privilege, yes, but the absolute core belief, written right into the Declaration of the Rights of Man, is that property is inviolable.
They want a state that serves property owners.
Precisely. But then you have the 1793 revolution. This is the radical one, the one driven by the Parisian sans-culottes. And for them, the key word isn't liberty, it's equality.
Socioeconomic equality.
Exactly. They're demanding things like the right to work, free education, and this is the big one, price controls. The law of the maximum to make sure bread is affordable. And to the bourgeoisie, that was a terrifying attack on their sacred right to property.
The clash of symbols from this time is just amazing. Take the red flag. Today we see it as the flag of the left, of revolution. But originally it was the opposite. The authorities would raise it to declare martial law, basically as a warning to the people that they were about to use force.
Like at the Champ de Mars massacre in 1791, it was the government's flag of suppression. Yeah. So the people just took it. They seized the symbol that was used against them and turned it into the banner of their own class struggle. The symbol of the people, laborieux, the working people. It's an incredible act of political jujitsu.
Okay, so this brings us to the most violent phase, the Terror of 93-94. It's easy to just focus on the guillotine, but our sources point out that, in a way, the Terror actually saved the moderate bourgeois revolution.
It did. It's debatable, of course, but it did protect the 1789 revolution from being totally crushed by its enemies, both inside and outside France. But the violence itself changed. It went from a hot, chaotic terror like the early massacres to a cold, systematic terror organized from the top down by the revolutionary tribunals.
And there was a whole geography to it, a path of death.
A very deliberate one. You'd be taken from the Conciergerie prison, where Marie Antoinette was held. The guards called her l'Autrichienne, the Austrian bitch, and then carted through the streets to the guillotine on the Place de la Révolution.
And the act of execution itself was a kind of political theater, this idea of shortening, raccourcissement.
It was about literally cutting the tall, well-fed aristocrats down to size. The king himself was exceptionally tall, so in their final moments, the people who had always been looked up to were now being looked down upon by the crowd. It's a brutal leveling.
But this era of popular power burns out pretty quickly. We get the Thermidorian reaction in 1794. How did the wealthy bourgeoisie manage to grab power back?
It was a very systematic dismantling of popular power. The Thermidorians, who represented the really affluent middle class, hated the price controls and social rights of 93, so they disarmed the sans-culottes, they dissolved the Paris Commune, their political voice.
And they changed the voting rules.
Immediately. They restricted suffrage right back to property owners, creating what they called a republic of the property owners. Later radical groups, like the Babouvists, tried to fight back, but they failed because they didn't understand who the sans-culottes were. They thought they were a modern proletariat, but many were small artisans who just wanted to own their own little shop. They weren't natural communists.
And then, to lock in this new bourgeois order, along comes Napoleon Bonaparte in 1799. He's called the godfather of bourgeois France.
He is. He got it immediately. He had that famous quote that in revolutions there are those who make them and those who benefit from them. He knew the common people made it, and he was there to make sure the bourgeoisie benefited.
And he did that by wiping the slate clean.
He literally demolished the physical traces of radicalism, like a Jacobin club. But more importantly, he cemented the legal idea of property. And nothing shows that more clearly than his decision to restore slavery in the colonies in 1802. Because to him, and to the class he represented, enslaved people were simply property.
So the Great Revolution doesn't actually end anything. It just sets a pattern for the next 100 years. You get these uprisings in 1830, 1848, 1871.
It's the same cycle over and over. Popular uprising, followed by a bourgeois hijacking.
In 1830, the people build thousands of barricades, but they end up with a constitutional monarch, Louis Philippe. The monument to their sacrifice, the July column, is still there on the Place de la Bastille.
Then it happens again in 1848. Workers rise up, they're crushed by the bourgeois government, and that paves the way for another Napoleon III.
And this little Napoleon is the one who really creates bourgeois Babylon. He hires Baron Haussmann to physically remake the city.
And Haussmannization is not just urban renewal. It is, as one source says, class warfare via architecture. He tears down the narrow, winding medieval streets where revolutionaries could build barricades.
And replaces them with the huge, broad boulevards we see today.
Exactly. It makes the city prettier for the rich, sure, But its main goals are to push the poor out of the center and make future revolts militarily impossible. It's social engineering.
And the ultimate symbol of this new Paris has to be the Eiffel Tower. Built for the 1889 centenary of the Revolution, it was just this giant monument to industrial capitalist power. It totally dominates the skyline, and it physically covers up the history of the Champs de Mars, a place of massacres and protest.
But there was one last huge explosion before that, the Paris Commune of 1871, a revolutionary state run by and for ordinary people.
And they brought back all the ideas from 1793, didn't they?
They did. A minimum wage, separation of church and state, votes for women. They were internationalists, not nationalists. They even tore down Napoleon's imperial Vendôme column, calling it a monument to barbarism.
But the backlash was devastating.
The repression, the tricolor terror, was unbelievable. When the government army took back the city, they just started executing people en masse. The estimates are 20 to 25,000 people killed in a single week.
Wait, hold on. The original terror, Robespierre's terror across all of France, was maybe 17,000 deaths? You're saying the repression against the Commune in Paris alone was worse?
Far worse. Far more brutal and efficient. It shows you how terrified the property classes were of a real social revolution. And it was a final, bloody victory for their order. The monuments built right after prove it.
Like the Sacré-Cœur Basilica.
Built on Montmartre, on the very hill where the Commune began, as an explicit act of penance for the godless socialism of the communards.
And you also get the statue of Joan of Arc, the monarchist icon, placed on the Place des Pyramides. It became a rallying point for the right wing, deliberately set against a traditional left-wing gathering spot at the Place de la Bastille. The city map itself becomes a political battlefield.
It really does.
So our whole journey has been from a royal city, run from the outside, to this bourgeois Babylon, where every boulevard and monument seems to scream that the property class won, using the very people who started the fight.
That's the story. It's a century-long, ultimately successful campaign by the bourgeoisie to capture and contain a revolutionary energy they didn't create. And, if you look at Paris today, especially the wealthy West, it still belongs to the haute bourgeoisie. You saw it during the recent Olympics, a celebration of luxury that glossed over the problems in the still plebeian East. So the question our sources leave you with is this. Does that 200-year-old conflict between ceux d'en haut, those above, and ceux d'en bas, those below, ever really end? Or is it just sleeping?
A very powerful question, and one we hope gives you plenty to think about. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.